Hi everyone, today I want to explore a pattern I've noticed repeatedly in clinical work. The specific kind of person avoidant individuals often end up strongly attached to, sometimes even more intensely than they expect themselves. This is not about labels or stereotypes. It is about relational dynamics, attachment patterns, and the subtle psychological fit that forms between two nervous systems over time. Because beneath the language we use to describe relationships, beneath personality traits and surface-level behaviors, there is something far more fundamental happening. Two internal regulation systems learning how to coexist with each other. When two people enter a relationship, they do not just bring their preferences, values, or communication styles. They bring entire histories of emotional learning. They bring what safety has felt like in the past, what inconsistency has trained them to expect, what closeness has cost them before, and what distance has taught them to tolerate. None of this is always conscious. Most of it operates beneath awareness, expressed through patterns rather than words. So what we often call compatibility is rarely just shared interests or personality alignment. It is more accurately a kind of nervous system synchronization that either stabilizes or destabilizes over time. Some pairings create immediate ease. There is a sense of emotional fluency, where both people can move toward and away from each other without triggering threat responses. In other cases, the fit is more complex. One person may naturally lean into closeness, while the other instinctively regulates through space. Neither is inherently wrong, but the interaction between these tendencies creates a dynamic rhythm that begins to define the relationship itself. Over time, this rhythm becomes predictable. One partner moves forward emotionally, seeking clarity, expression, or connection. The other adjusts by stepping back slightly, not necessarily out of rejection, but out of internal regulation. The first partner then senses distance and responds by either increasing emotional effort or suppressing their own needs to maintain harmony. And so a pattern begins to form, not through conscious agreement, but through repeated micro-adjustments that slowly shape the emotional architecture of the relationship. This is where the idea of a fit becomes psychologically interesting, because what feels like attraction at the beginning is often not just chemistry in the romantic sense, it is recognition at the nervous system level. One person's emotional style feels familiar to the other's internal expectations of connection. A person who regulates through independence may feel drawn to someone who does not immediately overwhelm their space. A person who regulates through attunement may feel drawn to someone whose emotional presence feels meaningful but slightly elusive. Each recognizes something that fits their internal map of connection. But familiarity is not the same as emotional ease. In fact, many relational patterns are built on familiarity that is slightly dysregulating. What feels familiar can sometimes simply mean known to my nervous system, even if it is not fully nourishing. So the fit between two people is not always about harmony. Sometimes it is about predictability of discomfort. Each person learns how to respond to the other in a way that keeps the relationship intact, even if it does not fully meet deeper emotional needs. And this is where attachment patterns quietly shape the long-term structure of intimacy. Because attachment is not just about how we feel in relationships. It is about how we regulate ourselves in response to closeness, distance, uncertainty, and emotional intensity. One nervous system may stabilize through proximity and communication, while another stabilizes through space and reduced emotional demand. When these systems interact, they begin to negotiate an unspoken agreement about how much closeness is sustainable. Over time, this negotiation becomes the relationship itself, not the words spoken during calm moments, but the patterns that emerge during emotional stress. Who reaches out first, who withdraws, who adapts, who waits, who recalibrates their emotional expression depending on the other's availability. And what makes this especially subtle is that both people are usually trying to preserve connection in the only way their internal systems know how. One may preserve it by maintaining independence and emotional control. The other may preserve it by increasing sensitivity, patience, and attunement. Neither strategy is inherently unhealthy in isolation. In fact, both are often adaptive responses to earlier life experiences. But when combined without awareness, they can create a dynamic where connection is maintained, but not fully expanded. Stability exists, but emotional depth becomes unevenly distributed. So when we talk about relational fit, We're not talking about perfection or incompatibility in a simplistic sense. We're talking about how two systems influence each other's capacity for emotional presence over time. Some pairings expand both nervous systems into greater flexibility. Others stabilize into roles that feel safe but constrained. And some become cyclical, where closeness activates distance and distance activates pursuit, creating a loop that neither person fully intends, but both contribute to maintaining. This is why relationships often feel so different from how they begin, because at the beginning there is novelty, openness, and less emotional history between the two systems. But as attachment deepens, the underlying regulatory patterns become more visible. The nervous systems stop performing and start reacting, and what was once chemistry begins to reveal its structure. In that sense, relational dynamics are less about finding the right person and more about observing what happens to your emotional system in the presence of another emotional system over time. Do you become more regulated, more grounded, more open? Or do you become more anxious, more restrained, more self-monitoring? Do you feel emotionally met in a consistent way? Or do you find yourself constantly adjusting to maintain connection? These are the real signals of relational fit at a deeper psychological level. And once you begin to see relationships through this lens, the focus shifts. It is no longer about categorizing people. It is about understanding patterns. Not to reduce love to psychology, but to understand why certain connections feel like ease while others feel like effort, even when the feelings involved are real. Because at its core, a relationship is not just two people trying to love each other. It is two nervous systems continuously learning what safety, closeness, and distance are allowed to feel like between them. When I work with avoidant clients, especially those in long-term relationships or marriages, I naturally become curious about the relational ecosystem they are in. Not just the avoidant partner's traits, but also the emotional structure of their partner, because attachment is never a one-person phenomenon. It is always co-created. And something interesting often emerges. The partner of an avoidant individual is frequently not needy or unstable in the obvious sense. In fact, quite the opposite is often true. They tend to be emotionally perceptive, self-contained, and highly adaptive in relationships. They often carry a quiet emotional intelligence, the kind that allows them to sense shifts in mood, detect distance early, and respond with careful calibration rather than overt demand. At first glance, these partners can appear secure, composed, even remarkably patient. They are often the type of person who does not escalate conflict easily. They try to understand before they react. They give space when space is needed. They are often deeply invested in maintaining emotional harmony, sometimes even at the cost of their own needs. But beneath that outward composure, there is often a subtle pattern of emotional overattunement. They become highly skilled at reading the avoidant partner's signals. Not just words, but tone, silence, timing, withdrawal cues, micro shifts in availability. Over time, they begin adjusting themselves almost unconsciously to maintain connection. If the avoidant partner pulls back, they soften. If the avoidant partner becomes distant, they become more patient. If emotional intimacy increases, they may also increase emotional openness, but in a carefully measured way that avoids overwhelming the system. This creates a dynamic that looks balanced on the surface, but is actually asymmetrically regulated. One partner sets the emotional distance, the other adapts to it. And what makes this particularly interesting is that avoidant individuals are often not initially drawn to overt pursuit or emotional intensity. That can feel activating or overwhelming to them. Instead, they often feel more comfortable with someone who is emotionally intelligent, non-intrusive, and able to respect space without protest. This creates a sense of safety. Not necessarily because the partner is distant, but because the partner is skilled at not pushing too hard against emotional boundaries. However, over time, this very adaptability can begin to create a subtle erosion of emotional reciprocity. Because when one person consistently regulates themselves around the emotional availability of the other, the relationship slowly begins to orbit one nervous system more than two. The avoidant partner may not consciously recognize this. In fact, they may experience the relationship as relatively stable. There is no dramatic conflict, no excessive emotional demand, no overt pressure. But what is often missing is sustained mutual emotional expansion. The relationship stabilizes, but it does not necessarily deepen in a fully reciprocal way. And here is where it becomes more psychologically complex. The partner of the avoidant individual is often someone who has learned through experience that love is maintained through emotional precision rather than emotional expression. They are careful not to ask for too much, not to disrupt equilibrium, not to overwhelm the other person's capacity for closeness. Over time, they may begin to internalize the belief that their needs must be carefully managed in order to preserve connection. So what looks like compatibility is often actually a finely tuned emotional negotiation. The avoidant partner maintains autonomy and distance. The other partner maintains connection and attunement. Both are doing what their nervous systems have learned to do well, but neither is fully free in the relationship, and this is where the deeper pattern becomes visible. Avoidant individuals are often drawn to partners who feel safe enough not to invade their space, but emotionally rich enough to feel meaningful when they do engage. There is a kind of balance that forms where closeness feels available, but not demanding. Connection feels possible, but not consuming. This creates a dynamic where intimacy is experienced in controlled intervals rather than sustained emotional immersion. From a clinical perspective, what is often happening is not a lack of love, but a mismatch in how love is regulated and expressed. The avoidant system regulates intimacy through distance. The partner often regulates intimacy through adaptation. Over time, this can create a quiet emotional asymmetry that neither person may initially recognize. And yet, there is usually a reason these pairings persist. Because they do work in a functional sense, they often maintain stability, shared life structure, and long-term commitment. There can be genuine care, loyalty, and shared history. But emotional fulfillment may fluctuate depending on how much each partner's deeper needs are acknowledged and met. What I find most important, and often most overlooked, is that both individuals in these dynamics are usually trying to preserve connection in the best way they know how. The avoidant partner preserves it through emotional control and self-protection. The other partner preserves it through emotional adaptation and attunement. Neither approach is inherently wrong, but without awareness, they can lock both people into roles that feel safe but not fully satisfying. And so the question becomes less about who is choosing who, and more about what emotional system are we maintaining together without realizing it. Because once that pattern becomes visible, the work is no longer about blame. It becomes about choice. Choice around how close is close enough. Choice around what emotional reciprocity actually looks like in practice. And choice around whether both people are willing and able to step beyond their default attachment strategies into something more consciously mutual. That is where real change begins. Let's say she's dismissive avoidant and he's anxious preoccupied. I'll look closely at his traits as well. And what I keep noticing is that the partners of avoidance tend to share a lot of the same qualities. And more often than not, the avoidant partner will actually admit it themselves, something like, yeah, I married her because of this, or I really love this about him. So whether people want to acknowledge it or not, there's a real pattern here. I genuinely believe avoidants fall deeply in love with a very specific kind of person, and today we're going to walk through some of those qualities. Now, if you don't recognize all of these traits in yourself, that's completely fine. You can choose to lean into a few of them if you want, but you don't have to force anything. Nobody's perfect, and that's okay. Also, I want to be upfront that this is somewhat speculative. It's based purely on patterns I've personally observed, and I could absolutely be biased here. I'm a therapist, which means I'm only seeing this through a fairly narrow lens, specifically the people who actually show up for therapy. Keep that in mind. Honestly, take everything I say on this channel with a grain of salt. I'm not perfect, nobody is, and at the end of the day, trust yourself more than you trust me. That's really the best way to put it. The first trait is someone who manages their own emotions well. Staying calm, regulating yourself internally, or expressing your feelings out loud in a way that isn't overwhelming. All of that can genuinely help an avoidant person feel respected and safely attached to you. It builds real closeness. The next trait is that you don't play games, and specifically, you don't manipulate. Look, mistakes happen, nobody's perfect, but the key is that you're not intentionally trying to manipulate them. You communicate clearly and directly without manipulation, because that keeps your avoidant partner from feeling overwhelmed. That's really the heart of it. The next one is that you carry a generally positive outlook, and it shows up both in how you talk and how you act. I like this trait a lot because honestly, it benefits every relationship, not just ones involving an avoidant partner. Basically, you hold a hopeful view of relationships and of life in general, and that comes through naturally in how you speak and carry yourself. Maybe you're watching the news about some politician going through a scandal, and you comment on how it's nice that despite everything, he and his wife have stayed together and worked through it. You weren't talking directly to your partner about your relationship, you were just sharing how you genuinely feel about relationships in general, but that positivity quietly rubs off on them. It helps loosen the grip of whatever negative beliefs they might be carrying about love and connection, simply because they're absorbing your outlook without even realizing it. Another trait is that you correct your partner respectfully and privately. Maybe they said something incorrect or did something a little embarrassing, and you want to gently let them know without making a scene. So you wait until it's just the two of you and pull them aside. If it matters, you bring it up. If it doesn't really matter, you let it go. Say they told a group of friends you've been together 2 years when it's actually closer to 3. Later, privately, you might say something like, "Hey, I really appreciated you sharing that with everyone. Just so you know, though, we're actually coming up on 3 years now." That's the idea. Correct them with care, never in a way that embarrasses them in front of others. Next is valuing effort over outcome. Most of the time anyway, not necessarily every single time, but consistently enough that it becomes part of how you treat both yourself and them. You say things like, "I really appreciate how hard you're trying," or "I'm glad we're the kind of couple that focuses on effort." You're not fixated on results or asking why something hasn't happened yet. Instead, you're acknowledging their progress and how much effort they're putting in. That's really all it takes, and avoidants deeply appreciate people who approach things this way, along with everything else we're talking about. Another trait I've noticed is that these partners know how to let things go. I see this a lot in couples therapy, where an avoidant partner will openly say something like, "I know I want to change, I want to save this marriage. I know she tends to let a lot of things go, and it's probably building up somewhere, and I want to do better because of that." They'll often say things like, "I really love that they don't hold on to every little thing. That's one of my favorite qualities in this person, and it motivates me to be a better partner." So avoidants genuinely value someone who doesn't dwell on every small issue. Now, little is a tricky word here because what feels small to one person might feel significant to someone else. But generally speaking, try not to dwell excessively and understand that sometimes letting something go for the moment helps build connection. That doesn't mean burying it forever, just not clinging to it in the moment. Next is giving space while still remaining consistent. I know that sounds like a contradiction, but stick with me. It means you allow space when it's genuinely needed, but you don't disappear or go cold. You stay present in your own way. You keep communicating, you still text them. Maybe you say something like, "I'll give you tonight to yourself, I'll check in tomorrow." That consistency matters just as much as the space itself. Another trait is navigating life with a sense of confidence in how things will turn out. This doesn't mean arrogance, and honestly, arrogance tends to push avoidance away rather than draw them in. What actually works is modeling genuine curiosity about life. Say you're unhappy at your job and thinking about applying elsewhere. You've got a couple of interviews lined up, you've built up some savings, and even though a lot of people might think it's risky, you decide to quit your current job to focus on yourself while you figure things out. Is that necessarily the smartest move? Depends on the situation, honestly. But the point is, you're moving through your life with that kind of confidence, and you're modeling curiosity rather than fear. Why does this matter so much? Because people often fall in love not just with traits they admire in a partner, but with traits they secretly wish they had themselves. Avoidants tend to struggle deeply with control. I actually used to be avoidant myself, and I had serious control issues, especially around my schedule, to the point where it pushed people away, and honestly, I didn't even care at the time. I needed things done my way, on my terms, all the time. I'm not like that anymore, thankfully. But here's the thing, when someone models curiosity instead of control, it quietly teaches an avoidant person that they don't have to be so rigid, so afraid of uncertain outcomes, so controlling, or so wrapped up in themselves. They start realizing there's another way to move through life, especially if they see that approach actually working out, and that really resonates with them. Next, validate their emotions. Acknowledge how they're feeling in vulnerable moments without judging them for it, because that's what builds real trust over time. Another trait is being someone who calls them out honestly when appropriate. It really depends on how long you've been together, but a lot of avoidant clients will openly admit in therapy, "I really respect that my partner tells me the truth, even when it's uncomfortable, and I trust their perspective." It doesn't need to happen constantly, just occasionally, when it counts. The next trait is that you actually talk about yourself too. A lot of you struggle with this one, and I see it constantly in therapy and in the comments on this channel too. You let your partner talk about their life, or if they're quieter, you ask about them, but you rarely share much about your own life in return. Please try to open up about yourself more. You matter too, and expressing that shows genuine self-belief. Constantly putting your partner first isn't actually healthy, and it can make them uncomfortable too. Avoidants really don't like being placed on a pedestal. It makes them deeply uneasy. I might dive deeper into that another time, but a lot of them grew up with situations where they were put on a pedestal in some way. I'll give you a quick personal example, and then we'll move on. I've mentioned before that my dad is avoidant. He raised me with this constant messaging of don't show emotion, don't do this, don't do that. My parents ended up divorced, and growing up I was a lot like my dad. Because of that, my mum became very attached to me, and she leans anxious in her attachment style. She had all these expectations of me, which honestly just pushed me further away, and it got exhausting. But what ended up happening was that even while she was deeply attached to me, she also placed me on this pedestal, partly because she was subconsciously trying to shape me into what she'd wanted from my dad, trying to change him through me, essentially. It didn't work. I pulled away more, she got more anxious, but she kept holding me up on that pedestal regardless. And here's the thing about being placed on a pedestal. Avoidants experience it very specifically. Someone anxious, preoccupied might not fully understand this, because they haven't lived it the same way. But if you're avoidant, or used to be, being placed on a pedestal often feels like, if I don't live up to this, you're going to be furious with me. I know that's rarely the actual intention, but that's genuinely how it registers emotionally. When you put someone on a pedestal, you end up chasing after them constantly, expecting so much, becoming fixated on how they turn out. It creates this unspoken pressure of, if you're not exactly this way, I'm going to be upset and fall apart. You might not even be doing that consciously, but avoidants often carry that fear anyway, based on real past experiences. I'm speaking from personal experience here, and you might find your own partner feels exactly the same way, so try not to put them on a pedestal. Share parts of yourself too. You matter just as much. You're equals in this. The next trait is being non-judgmental. Avoidant individuals genuinely feel safest in spaces where they aren't being judged, and that safety is what allows real closeness to grow. And the last trait is introducing new experiences together, doing something neither of you has really tried before. Maybe it's new for them, maybe it's new for you too. Could be rock climbing, could be learning chess. Honestly, it doesn't matter what it is. This helps them see you in a fresh light. New situations let them appreciate who you are without feeling any pressure to be someone different. So let's quickly recap everything. Manage your own emotions well. Don't play games or manipulate. Stay generally positive about life and relationships. Correct them gently and privately when needed. Value their effort more than the outcome most of the time. Let go of the smaller stuff instead of holding on to everything. Give space while still staying consistently present. Move through life with confidence, curiosity, and presence. Validate what they're feeling. Call them out honestly every once in a while, since it helps them trust your judgment. Talk about your own life too, whatever that looks like for you. Stay non-judgmental, and introduce new experiences into the relationship whenever you can. I really hope this was helpful to someone out there. If it was, feel free to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.